Hello, good evening, everyone. This is Nivarthi Jairam, and we have Carl Adamson with us. So, we are going to address cultural transformation and how to lead the change. So, before we get started, just a kind of a disclaimer that we are not going to address any models here. It would be more about our experiences, how we have seen culture to be, and how we have experienced the change, and probably also how we have gone through it ourselves. So we're not saying this is the best or this is the only way to do it. It's just we thought let's go ahead and share our experiences, and possibly you can find something valuable from that to use, and also try and see if we can learn from your interactions as well. I think we are having some trouble streaming to LinkedIn. They're just trying to get it resolved. Uh, Please check LinkedIn to ensure stream looks okay. Let me check LinkedIn just for a moment to see it is working fine, Carl. Just to be sure that we're able to see ourselves. Those on LinkedIn, are you able to see us? If you can respond, let me also parallelly check LinkedIn. Yes, I think I can see myself on LinkedIn. Just give me a minute. Issue on LinkedIn. Yes. Okay, I can see ourselves on LinkedIn. I guess it's okay. So let's go ahead, Carl. As I said, just for a repeat, probably if we have missed that. So we are going to cover something. We're going to cover something on cultural transformation based on our experiences. So we are not saying this is the best or this is the only way to do it. Carl, would you agree?
Absolutely. It's everyone will have different experiences because the people that we're dealing with, the individuals, they're all unique. So our experiences of helping them and working with them will obviously differ.
Absolutely, Carl. And if you can start with a bit of your introduction and also about Agilistics and what you're doing there.
All right. Okay. So I've been working in the agile space probably since 2003 when I did my first official Scrum project. I was trained in Scrum formerly by Jeff Sutherland, and I've had the privilege of working with many successful teams, and we've had some great outcomes. Prior to that, I was working in project management as a technical project manager and solutions architect. So I've got a technical background, so that often helps with the types of teams that I work with. We have our own consultancy, Agilistics, where we support and develop SharePoint and Dynamics solutions, something we specialize in. And we use Agile for that, mainly Scrum. But we also teach and coach Agile teams as well, and that's really important. So for us, we get that full cycle of training, coaching, but also using what we've taught and coached ourselves. So eat our own dog food, if you like. We're about to launch a new Agilistics Academy, which will be coming shortly in early May, where we'll be helping people to reskill and upskill with Agile.
Great. And Carl, to start with, what do you think is, how do you define culture in your understanding and experience, and how you have experienced culture?
Well, how we experience culture may be different for different people, but essentially I would describe it as I think one of the best ways I've seen it, heard it described, is by Siobhan McHale in her book, The Insider's Guide to Culture Change. And she describes it as the way we do things around here. So it's very well that a company may have its own approach and values, but actually the way things are done could be very different. So it's basically the behaviors that we see going on behind the scenes.
And that's what I also probably kind of visualized, that culture to be more of what you see in informal gatherings rather than the formal gatherings, right?
Absolutely.
So it's not something you find in the boardroom or you find in a meeting room where the leaders are available and the teams are interacting with the leaders. I have seen the cultures to be more evident and easily visible in cafeterias or in coffee breaks or in probably smoke breaks as well. Is that your experience as well?
Absolutely, yes. And to be honest, when I'm asked to engage with a team or an organization, I usually start with the leadership teams because that's where the invitation usually comes from. And I often find that their perception of their own corporate culture is very, very different to what I observe within the teams, within the people. So it's really important to observe, to listen and observe. That's the most important tool we have as coaches. I very rarely go into a team and begin to give advice. I mean, who am I to give advice if I've no idea what their challenges are? And the only way you'll really find out what the corporate culture is about, you're absolutely right. You go to where the people are, where they are most relaxed, where they're most off guard. The canteen, the coffee machine, those kinds of things. You'll get to hear things and understand some of the challenges that really are what drive a company.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have quite a few people joining on LinkedIn. I think, hi Rajesh and Alex, nice to have you here. And so again, when we are talking about the culture, what again I see as evident is it's more about how people deal with each other, and even those issues that are not getting solved generally on office emails tend to get solved much easier in those cafeterias and smoke breaks, so or even coffee breaks that we tend to go with. And also in my personal experience, I also kind of observed quite a bit. You see those informal leaders that are more visible in those settings, who probably have a greater influence on the teams than even the managers and leaders themselves. What is your thought around that? Because those people tend to probably have a greater say in how people act and behave even in the work scenario, as it is seen where when we are in an informal setting.
Yes, it's where people behave naturally. When we come to work, we wear a different hat to the one we wear when we're at home or relaxing with friends. So our behaviour and the way we would express things is likely to be more guarded. Some people would say more professional. So that's really where we're missing something. If we're in an environment which is quite formal, people are less likely to speak up. There may not be the psychological safety within the teams to be able to speak up and say what you think and express how you feel. So it's really hard to get a real idea of what the underlying currents are above the still water on the surface, the things that are really driving how the people in the business actually behave and respond to things. So those people that are in a position to say, well, this is how we do it, are not necessarily able to portray what really is happening under the surface.
Mm. And when you have to start, when you have a new team, generally what I see as a probably an anti pattern from my point of view is that they have a separate initiative called cultural transformation.
Mm.
But does that really work that way? But because in my experience, when you are interacting with the team and you are trying to help them transform or adopt to the agile practices and ways of working and the right mindset you need, you are working more on the culture than the practices to start with, right? Because you want them to build that kind of mindset and that kind of culture within the team itself. So having a separate initiative called cultural transformation, is that the way to go?
No, not really, because you're not going to get the having something that is separate from what's really happening. It's like having a plan and not really following it. You've got the plan on the wall, but people are really doing something else. What's the point in that? If we took a real lean attitude to that, it's just wasteful because it's not really delivering results. You need to have total engagement from leadership right the way down through to team level. Everyone needs to engage and participate. It's not transformation isn't a plan that you follow. It's a set of behaviors on a journey that you develop according to your own needs as an organization.
And also we see that we have a lot of cultural assessments as well, but how do you actually start on a transformation journey when you are kicking off a transformation for a team, let's say? Do you integrate culture aspects also into your observations, how people are talking to each other, how people are interacting with each other, how the leadership is behaving? So what would be your approach to start with, with the transformation journey itself?
So the way I would do it, and I'm not saying this is the right way for everyone, but what works for me is I will go in and I will just listen and observe. By doing both of those things at all levels, so you will. What I'm really looking for is not just what I'm seeing and hearing. I'm looking for what people aren't saying. I'm looking for the unspoken words and the behaviors, the actions that you wouldn't normally see. There's a lot that you can learn from people by just listening to what they're not saying, because that's usually the hidden truth. But you can only do that if you go in and you actively listen. And that can be challenging. Often people think that I've come in to assess them or judge them in some way, and they can be quite closed down because of that. And naturally so, I would be the same. It's a natural human thing. So it's about gaining their trust, helping them to understand that I don't have the answers that they're looking for, but they sure will have. The answers are usually there with the people. And so it really is about listening, and that it can be something that happens relatively quickly. It might take time, but once you get into that habit and you start listening, actively listening, showing empathy so that people really understand that you understand what their challenges are, reading back to them what they're saying to you so they can hear you saying it. I think all these things are important to really understand the bigger picture, but it has to be done at both levels, because leadership teams will normally say to you, "Hey, Carl, come and deliver us some transformation, and here's some money to do the job. Let us know when you've done it." And the first thing I say is, "Come here. You need to be actively involved in this, and everyone needs to be on that journey. It's not something that a coach can deliver. We're only there to be those witnesses that listen and observe, and to be able to hold up a mirror and allow people to see how they're actually working together or not, and see their own weaknesses, but also their own strengths. Because often I go into companies where they have natural agility. Teams have natural agility, and it's just not been recognized. And so it's about finding what their strengths are, building on those, rather than saying, right, here's a list, you've got all these things wrong. So reading between the lines at all levels.
And also, I think Nilanshi made that point quite early, that listen and observe is the most important tool that coaches have. That's absolutely true. And what I also have seen is that many times leaders have a view that we are already leaders. When you talk about transformation, okay, this is my team, go ahead and transform. And when I had those questions, what about you? No, we are already leaders. That's an answer you get. Is that your experience as well?
Yeah, I've often felt like a referee in a football game when I'm actually coaching a team of leaders, because they are the most competitive people on the planet. I mean, that's how they became leaders. Let's understand that. They are the gladiators of management. That's why they got the title of leader. And they're immensely competitive with each other. When we're playing agile games and stuff like that, it really is, a case of, I keep saying to myself, I'm going to bring a whistle next time I do one of these sessions, because they just take it so seriously. It's not a game. It's something that they have to win, and they have to be seen to win. So there is this natural, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, the companies need people like that. But to be the kind of leader that's required to lead change isn't about leading from the typical position they would normally feel they're leading from. It's really about showing empathy, showing vulnerability, showing that there is actually psychological safety for the teams to actually step up and say what they think and express how they feel without fear of any repercussions. That takes a lot of effort, particularly from the kind of people that normally lead a business that do so from a position of strength and authority. It really takes a lot to be able to step down from that and say, how can I do this differently?
Yeah, and also I think it's about creating that awareness in the leaders also, right? Most of the times, possibly they are so much into their own requirements of their own day-to-day functioning that they don't realize the need for their participation as well. And many times, even if some people do realize, they may not have that leverage to do that also. So in my experience, many times when I have those conversations, it's more like, okay, how do you want your teams to be at the end of this transformation? And when they chalk out that kind of expectations that they have on how the team should be acting, how the team should be functioning, then having a conversation as to, if the team has to be this way, what do you think you need to change? It becomes more of a constructive dialogue than a challenging conversation where you are confronting the leader to possibly become vulnerable. It becomes more of a constructive dialogue. If you have to change something, what is that you think you should change? How do you
Yes.
have kind of conversations?
Well, I think you called it out there. They don't realize, they may not be aware the way that they are working isn't going to be conducive to a good outcome for a transformation. It may have been great to get them to where they are today, but if they want to go forward and they really do want to transform and work in a different way, then the change has to come from within. But that's not always obvious. Remember, these, the leaders of organizations have got there because of their leadership abilities. And what we're really asking them to do is to get on a bicycle with a blindfold and say, it's okay, go and ride it. And of course, what will happen is they'll immediately grab the handlebars and they'll hold on even tighter than they would do if they just took the blindfold off, because they can't see where they're going, and they lose a sense. Excuse me, they lose a sense of balance and direction. And I wrote an article about this on LinkedIn some time ago. Don't make your managers grab the handlebar. And it's really important that we kind of understand that when managers get involved and micromanage agile teams, which is not what agile teams need, they're only doing so because they're not getting that feedback from the teams. They're not getting that visibility. So they're seeing, well, this isn't working where I want it. Let me grab the handlebars even tighter, and it's more of a reaction. But I think it's about taking them on a journey so that they can see why they need to change their approach. This thing that we're talking about, agile, may be very different to the culture that is already in the organization. That's why they're asking for transformation. Well, that requires a different approach, but helping them to understand that is key. It's not about confronting them, absolutely not. It's about working with them to help them understand. Because once they understand, yeah, great, thank you. I get that now. So I can see where I'm going. Let's go with it. What can I do to help?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are a couple of questions that are coming up, possibly, and both of them are in the line of our discussion. So the first one from Vishal is that I feel the cultural change is like telling people to change the way of working, and many people are ready for the change or not ready for the change, possibly, as the change is a bit difficult. What key points can we put up in front of the team as benefits of change? Firstly, the question I think is around, is cultural change telling people to change the way of working, or is it to change the way of thinking?
I think it's a journey. And as I said, it will depend on the organization and their aspirations for change and their appetite for change. And it's not about telling people anything. It's about asking people to work together and find out what that outcome needs to be, find out what the route to the objective actually is. You won't get very far at all by telling people what to do. The whole purpose of Agile and the fundamental parts of it are about self-organization, self-management, and the discipline that comes with that. By telling people this is what we're going to do, that's not a good approach. Far better to say, well, this is where we need to get to. We've not done that before. We don't know exactly how we're going to do it. But bear in mind, the people that are actually doing the work are best placed to know the answers. They're the ones with the experience of doing the work. So let's involve them in actually mandating what those objectives are going to be, not just management. Let's actually flip this around and get the management to invite the people into that decision. Of course, the management will have an objective for the business. It could be revenue, it could be a whole bunch of different things. But let's get the people actively involved in contributing to that and saying, how do we get there? What's the journey? You can't tell them how to do it because actually they know how to do it. They're just not usually asked. So let's ask them.
And also, I think when you have those expectations from the leadership, they also need to be reciprocated by the team as well, right? So it has to be a mutual agreement of those expectations or objectives that we are trying to accomplish through the transformation. There could be a big variance in what I as a leader want, but what the team sees as the outcome they would actually look at, right?
Yeah, and this is important that management sell the concept to the team. What's in it for me is going to be something that a lot of people will be asking, the people doing the work. Why should I do this? I know you want it because you want bigger bonuses. The investors want, greater returns on their investment. But really, what's in it for me? Tell me really why I should be able to do this and what the underlying reasons are and how I can benefit from it as well. That should be something that management can do with the objectives that they're setting. I often say to teams, particularly, let's take, for example, Scrum teams. Scrum teams often struggle with agreeing what the sprint goal is. The goal for this sprint is going to be X, Y, Z. They have terrible trouble doing it. It's a general thing. Some people will say, oh, it's just to finish all the items in our sprint backlog and deliver them. Well, that's not good enough. Why do you want the money to run this sprint? And I use the analogy, if you were stuck in the lift with the CEO and the CEO said, oh, Steve, you're running this sprint starting on Monday. Why should I give you the money for that? What's in it for the business? And if teams can't actually answer those questions, I say to them, well, perhaps you shouldn't be doing the work because that work hasn't been clearly defined to you by the product owner, by the business. So I think it's important that to get people to engage and come on that journey, that the concept of what management are trying to achieve is sold to the teams. So they say, now I get it. I really understand. I want to be part of this. I want to help you achieve it with my team members in any way that I can. And so I think that's really important, is to get that engagement by selling the concepts to the teams, hearing their feedback, maybe changing and honing, refining those concepts so that they're far better defined, those objectives, so they can be delivered and improved. But you must work with the teams, the people delivering that, and get them actively engaged. That is the beginning, the starting point of transformation.
Yeah, and that brings us to the question I also was about to bring it up. Do you believe culture change is kind of a bottom up or a top down approach? Easy to change the culture at team level and then demonstrate to one level up. Is that the right way to, what is the right way to approach cultural change?
Well, cultural change is an all-level approach. It's not just top-down. We always throw that into the argument as agile practitioners. Oh, the management weren't involved, so that's the problem. It has to, as you called out earlier, Nivarti, the teams need to be engaged. The people delivering the work need to be engaged. They need to actually be bought into that whole concept as well. Usually, it's an easier win to get teams involved. It's not normally as challenging as it is to get management involved, but transformation is a team effort, a corporate team effort. It's not something that is done from one end or the other. It has to be done jointly, so the whole business moves in unison.
Yeah, and also, a team, when we talk about a team at a business unit level or at a tribe level, based on how the teams are structured or the organization is structured, there could be multiple cultures within a large business unit, right? So because there is nothing like single organizational culture. It's an accumulation of subcultures at different levels of the organization based on how it is structured. And many times, collectively at a business unit level, the culture may be different, but there is a small team where the culture is entirely what an agile culture looks like, because the leader for that team is a kind of different leader. That's also possible, right? So it has to be bottom up versus top down. It cannot be an unilateral approach, but as coaches, possibly we need to have that visibility of the various factors at play in different segments of that particular team we are referring to in the context.
Yes, and this is why observing and listening is so important for a coach. You need to be listening and observing at all levels in order to call out or perhaps ask the right questions to the right people to help them challenge themselves in that. But usually these things will start in a boardroom and work their way to the rest of the business from there. It's rare for change to be initiated, a corporate level change to be initiated at team level successfully and worked up to the top. It happens. It can happen where teams have discovered things and said, we change this and look at the outcome, and it gets to the top of the tree, they get wind of it and they say, great. They usually then take the credit for it themselves. But that's another story. But I think it really is important that the coach is able to listen and observe and be there to ask the challenging questions to the right people at the right time.
Yeah, and also maybe just it may look like I'm complicating this a bit, but because it's already a complex subject. But what in our earlier discussions also we have kind of looked at this more deeply to say, is system influencing the culture, right? And so you look at the system, how the system is operating at different levels. System has a different definition at, from where you are looking at that particular system, right? What is your viewpoint, where you are standing, and from that point how the system functions largely influences the culture.
That's a really emotive question for me, actually, Navati. You will know I did some training with you quite recently, and that came up as a question, and essentially the question was something along the lines of, does basically what you just said, does the changing the system affect the behavior, or is it the changing behavior that affects and changes the system? And I've always kind of led with the concept of, well, of course, it's the behavior. That's what it's all about. If you can get a change in behavior, then the systems will change. But I really got thinking about this quite deeply. I've trained and coached quite a lot of teams over the last 18 months, and I kind of thought, well, what really happened there? Let's just go back and analyze some of the things that are happening. So I did an introduction to Agile. We then got into the complexities of whatever the Agile approach was that we were going to use. It might be Kanban, it might be Scrum. And I got them set up with their electronic Kanban boards. We used in these particular cases Azure DevOps, ADO, and I got this all kind of configured so that it would work intuitively for them, so they could focus on their work whilst minimizing their work in progress and maximizing their flow of value delivered to the business. And I thought, well, actually, Carl, what you've just done there by doing the training, the coaching, the configuring of the ADO boards and getting it set up so that the rules are easy to follow. You've got simple dashboards that call out when you're doing something that is less, it's kind of something that is delivering less value. You can see that very clearly in your boards. That's actually a system. What I've done there is actually created a system. And was it the fact that the teams had a system, a way of working that changed their behavior? Because they did improve. They all improved. Some of them had some amazing outcomes. Or was it the fact that they changed their behaviors? And I'm kind of thinking perhaps it was the fact that they did have a system and they could fit into that, and it just worked. So I'm seeing things very differently now. I haven't really come to a bottom line conclusion, but I do agree that changing the system can affect the behavior positively or negatively. But obviously we want to make sure that if we are creating systems for people to work within, that those systems are producing positive outcomes. And the only way we can know that is if we measure it. We should be measuring that constantly.
And that definitely brings to the next question. Is cultural change measurable?
It depends what your datum is. It depends what you're going to measure it by. That's a really, we could be here for weeks talking about this and engage with everyone that's on the call, and we'd never come up with a definitive answer, because everyone and every opportunity to actually try this is different. But there are ways that you can actually measure progress towards a goal, towards an outcome. And if you said, well, that's what we're trying to achieve, it would be quite obvious in some cases that the cultural change must have taken place in some shape or form to allow the business to achieve those objectives. So if you set your objectives and you can measure progress towards those objectives, that's one way of measuring a commercial outcome. But another way is to actually talk to the people, get the feedback, let them tell you how things are working or not for them. Is the work culture a happy place to work now? Is it better than it was before? Are people more stressed or less stressed? I think these are things that it'd be difficult to put numbers on them, but you can certainly get a feeling as to whether things are changing for the better by asking.
Yeah, I think we can look at it more like a qualitative outcome than a quantitative outcome, right? And possibly then how you can relate the qualitative outcomes to be influencing the quantitative outcome that you are referring to, or you have set for, right? So another element probably we also tried is to look at bringing those rewards into play to say how many people have helped somebody else in their work during the period that we are looking at. It's a way of rewarding even somebody coming up and in the team meeting and saying, okay, I thank this person because that person came out and helped me solve this problem. That also brings in a kind of fulfillment, a sense of fulfillment for people who are taking that extra effort to go ahead and help people. And that also builds the culture of collaboration within the team. It also helps possibly in bringing everybody up to the same level of competence as well.
So what you just described there is what I call Agile Champions. These are people within the organization that have actually benefited themselves and understand Agile concepts and techniques, and they're able to help and influence their colleagues in some way on their Agile journey. And in fact, for me, that is true Agile transformation, when the people transform the people, not the coaches trying to transform the people. And so these can be the most valuable tools in the toolbox, to have people that within the business can go forth and help other people and say, well, look, I've tried this and it works for me. Why don't you give it a go? Rather than saying, well, Carl said this is a good idea and he's working for the boss, so we better just go and give it a try. At least we'll know whether it works or not once we've tried it. Far better for the people to transform the people. That really is, and it's a wonderful thing to observe as well. It's a privilege to see that. When you see it, yeah, you can't really put it into words, but the feedback that you get from that is amazing.
Yeah. And I think, yeah, somebody caught it. So you may want to correct the spelling of the change in your banner above.
Well, that change didn't work, did it? Yes,
So that's definitely a typo, nothing intentional. So sorry for that, probably. So I don't think I can change it now, but yeah, that's good to know. Thank you for catching it. So again, now that we have spoken quite a bit about how the cultural change can influence or can be impactful for the team and possibly how to look at it, there is also a sense when you as a coach get into the system and you are trying to drive transformation as a coach, probably you are kind of caught up in between the leadership and the team. Many times it is seen that the leadership would see you as as someone standing for the team, and the team looks at you other way around, possibly thinking you are a representative for the leadership, and that could influence the level of trust you actually could build with the team or the leadership, vice versa, right? And that definitely influences how much you can influence the change.
I think it's about being genuine. It's about being transparent. It's about showing empathy, so that the people that you're working with at any end of the scale, whether they're leadership teams or the teams actually doing the work, know that you are there listening to them. They know that you are there fighting their corner. So the management are going to be hoping that the coaches are taking their message and delivering it and making it happen within the business. The teams are going to be hoping that the coaches are taking back the issues and the problems and the challenges that the team are facing that the managers aren't listening to. And it's about finding space to create a forum where everyone's voice can be heard, because you can't have any kind of meaningful transformation that is one-sided. The coach needs to actually show that they are impartial, but they have compassionate empathy. And that's really important, regardless of who they're working with. If you can do that, you can build trust. Once you've built trust, you've got a very, very powerful tool to help to encourage transformation within the business as a whole.
And that comes from the integrity you display, right? In whichever conversation that you are part of, whether you are speaking to the leaders or the team, or probably in a combined scenario where you have the team and the leader, how you display your integrity is what would essentially build the credibility and the trust factor with the team. And that comes from doing the right thing the right way, not being influenced or possibly even be sometimes negatively or psychologically ourselves not being safe in that environment, because many times you are in a situation where doing the right thing or saying the right thing also could mean it could be something that could impact us as coaches.
Yeah. So I refer to it as mortgage-driven agile. Often as coaches, we don't have the psychological safety in the environment we're working in to call things out, to say things, because I've had discussions with many coaches that have kind of been surprised when I've said something. Often it will be to management. Sometimes it might be to a team itself. Sometimes you do have to have these difficult conversations. But if a coach hasn't got the psychological safety to speak up and call things out when they see things that do need calling out, they haven't got the ability to perform their role, the role that they've actually been engaged to perform. And for me, that's a worse scenario than the risk of being fired. Many, many, many times I put my neck on the line and I just do what needs to be done and say what needs to be said to actually move things along, move things forward. And I'm not saying that's a thing that all coaches should do. It's something that you have to decide upon based on the environment you're working with, the culture that's already there, the underlying patterns, to understand whether you can or can't say something or whether you should or shouldn't. So I'm not going to make that call and suggest to other people, but it's the way that I roll. And so far, it's worked out. I've not been fired and people have listened and things have changed. But sometimes things don't change. So I can think of a team that I was working with, and they've been working on a product for about 10 years. Mainly the agile part of it, they've been trying to use Scrum for the last 5 or 6 years. And there were all kinds of issues that they had. But one of the issues was, and I saw this very quickly, that they spent an awful lot of time talking about their testing and UAT environments and keeping them running. And it took up all of the time in any meetings. This thing was a priority. It was very hard to get time to actually talk about the work that needed to be done for the business. And so I called this out and asked the question, why is this such a problem? And I've always been like this, Carl, and we've tried to complain to management about it for years, and it's never going to change. So don't even bring it up. It's not. And I said, well, I'm going to have to. We're going to have these conversations, because unless we actually highlight that as a bottleneck, you're never going to be able to move forward. And I'll just be another coach that's come in and gone away, and you've been fed up because you haven't got the outcome that you're looking for. So I worked with them and another coach to make those problems visible. We visualize them in our Scrum boards. We put some metrics behind it. We actually logged all the hours that teams were spending working on it, and until management had something they could go to senior management with and say, look at these numbers. We knew it was bad, but we didn't know it was this bad. So it's a little bit like the culture that I kind of see when I first went in there. What I saw was a bit like the elephant that's tied to a little stick with a bit of rope. They could easily pull that stick out the ground or break the rope, but they're trained from being very, very young calves to that they can't, if they're tied up, they're not strong enough to break the rope. And eventually they just give up and they don't bother. So when they become mature elephants, you see elephants are really tethered with such a flimsy little piece of stick and a bit of, old rope. They don't move because they don't think they can. They become complacent. They kind of surrendered to the way things are. And that's what I was told at the time. It's the way things are here, Carl. It will never change. Well, actually, you have the strength to break free of that rope and do things differently. Let me show you how. And that's really the approach that I've taken that has actually achieved some outcomes. But it's overcoming that complacency, which can be a really, really big problem for a coach.
And that is, I feel, is influenced by the system, which I go back to again.
Yeah, absolutely right. Absolutely right. Totally agree with you. Yes.
And interesting question here. What have been your favorite questions or indicators to understand the current culture in any environment? What do you look for?
Wow. I guess I haven't got a favorite question because every scenario is different. What I do recall doing with a leadership team, I was brought in to run a whole day coaching session with them, and this particular team had been responsible for recommending Agile as a way to go within the business. This particular team was in charge of strategy. So I kind of started the session by saying, weren't you the team that put the company on the track for Agile transformation? Oh yeah, that was us. Oh yeah, that's brilliant. How do you feel? Great. We're really, really chuffed with it. That's why you're here. We're taking it to the next level. So you ask the business, the people in the business to transform. Did you mean it? I said, sorry, did you mean it? And then that opened up the conversation to actually challenge them to understand what they've asked for. Because in many ways, they're asking the business to transform. This is the thing I want you to do, and I'm going to set up a KPI for it, and I'm going to measure it and look at it every week, and you tell me whether you're agile or not. That isn't transformation. And it wasn't that they were trying to be difficult or belligerent in any way. No one had really asked them that question. Did you mean it? What does it mean to ask your business, your people, to transform? And if you're going to ask that question, you need to be the one leading the change and actively engage. So I guess that's a question that was pertinent to that particular scenario, that situation at the time. But any question is a good question.
Yeah, and one of the questions I did ask in such a scenario was first to understand their expectations. You draw out or represent, exhibit what expectations you have from the team, right? How do you think they should be functioning? and then that, when that is drawn out by the leaders, generally when you have those first conversations, I did ask question as to, okay, where you think you are in this construct that you have defined. Where are you as a leader? Are you inside within the team, or are you outside of the team? What is your position? That does spark some kind of a thought process, and what they say after that gives an indication of their own mindset at that point in time, how they look at themselves to be, right? And the second one, we did have a conversation with one of the teams, when we were talking about moving teams from probably taking accountability to taking ownership, and a lot of people tend to use them as synonyms, but they're quite different. And when we ask the team, why do you think you are, or how do you think you can be taking ownership for the work you do? And then they came up with a lot of requirements or problems that they normally didn't speak when the leaders were around. And we did the same thing with the leaders as well. And then kind of exchanged the information between the leaders and the teams in separate rooms, saying, okay, this is what the team thinks that they would, if they are given, or if this kind of environment is provided to them, they could probably be at their best. And to the team, what the leadership felt about why they are not at their best. And then we brought them both together in one room to say, okay, this is what you said about them, and this is what they are saying about you. Now have a conversation, right? So it's kind of, what it did was, okay, they had a, safe environment to express. Of course, leader always has that environment because they are given more by the hierarchy or their position. And when we ask the team, okay, are you comfortable for these to be shared with your leadership, right? So they did want to exclude some points from there. And those kind of scenarios, when you create, you get to understand what is the thought process, what is the kind sense of psychological safety they have in the environment, or what they are threatened by. And those could be the indications of how the system is functioning in the organization, what is the culture that is driving at that point in time, right? And then look to address those. And to maintain that integrity, we did take out those points from the visibility of the leaders, because it's important that their psychological safety is also maintained. Because it's not a end state, there is no cultural end state for it to be evolved, right? It's an evolutionary culture. And people talk about four different quadrants in some models, or even a certain kind of culture that is defined for an agile team. But it's continuously evolving culture, right? And that's what, again, Sandeep also says, that culture change is never ending process. But what is the best trigger to start thinking about cultural change? I don't think there should be a trigger. As you say, it is a continuous process, and it's a never ending process. It's about being better than who we are as a team today, because it's all about the trust that is being developed between the team members, that drives the collaboration that we can have. And then together, what level of outcomes we can produce, and what sort of environment we create for the team. And because trust is not binary, you can trust, the ultimate level of trust is possibly trusting somebody with your life. Can the team reach to that extent, right? Or probably even beyond that, if there is another level that they could uh, evolve to. Is that the way you think, or you have something of different thought process, Carl?
No, I do agree. I think that cultural change is something that is ongoing. It is evolutionary. I was recently reading Delivering Happiness by Tony Hsieh. Zappos. And it's quite amazing that it's one of the things that he calls out in the book. It's something that is constantly changing because the business was constantly changing, because the world was constantly changing and adapting to change. More so now than ever, there will be few businesses that can carry on regardless since the pandemic. Most businesses are in a position where they have no choice but to adapt and respond to new market conditions. That requires a certain amount of cultural change within their organization. And it's about understanding, where are we now? What is our culture now? So many times people will try to initiate a cultural change within an organization without understanding what the current culture actually is. Most important to understand that first. And then once you have that understanding, what do we need to change to achieve X or deliver Y? That's important, but you must understand where you are right now today at all levels across the business. And you want to be in a position where you don't have to dilute the message back to the leaders because it won't be taken well. That obviously is an anti-pattern that would need to be developed and understood and changed, but it really is about understanding where you are now and understanding that cultural change is continuous, never
And
stops.
also what it needs to be in the context of the business outcomes we are looking for at that point
Mm.
of time, right? Because it's about, many times it may be about survival, many times it may be about taking competitive advantage, or many times it may be about the cost factor. It's also about looking at what is the current state of the organization, and based on that, how do we need to respond as a team and collectively agree to that kind of response. And for that to happen, you need to have a culture of trust within the team and the transparency about what is your current state in that context, what you are going through personally or even professionally, and how much you are able to contribute to the success of the team or the organization at that point in time.
Yes, because there could be other factors that affect you as a coach in your ability to help a team or a business transform. And you need to be aware of that. So one of the things about being a coach, you need to have a very strong awareness of who you are and your own strengths and weaknesses and your own bias as well. Cognitive bias is something that can play very heavily and be a very big disruptor for a coach to achieve a good outcome. So it's really about that awareness that you have to have as a coach of yourself so that you can actually be impartial, but still be able to ask the right questions at the right time to help the people that you're working with to transform.
Absolutely. I think as a coach, being present to yourself, again, listening actively to yourself as well, is very important also to understand what is that you are being influenced by, right? That you are possibly not being able to observe the patterns or the behaviors or the culture that is prevalent in the system, or look at the signs of possibly, a simple thing like, okay, I have a conflict with somebody, can you try and help me resolve that? Somebody coming to you with that kind of a ask essentially means that there is lack of trust within the team itself, because what is stopping that person from going and having a conversation, even though if it is a conflict with another person in the team, why it is required that a coach needs to step in? It's probably, we all look at it from resolving the conflict perspective, but the point to look at is, okay, why there is a resistance to resolve the conflict themselves. Even a simple point like that could be an indication of what the culture is within the team, right?
Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head there. So you called out the thing that isn't the thing. The thing that most people look at is that one person couldn't talk to the other without the aid of a coach. And as you said, you've got to be looking at why are they asking that? What's the underlying root cause of that? And this is often what we find ourselves doing when we ask the right questions. The answers we get back aren't the answers. The answers are the underlying things, the things that are below the surface that are the root cause. And we should, at every opportunity, seek out the root cause, not try and deal with the symptom. So that's a really good example that you've given there, Navarti. Love it.
Wonderful call. I think we are getting to the end of time. So thanks a lot for sharing your thoughts. It's been really, really wonderful. Again, it's a very complex topic. I think at least we could share the experience of how we have seen it, how we have possibly looked at resolving the issues that might arise, or the underlying reasons that could impact how the culture could be in organizations, or within the teams, and possibly how teams could look to evolve when they are looking to embark on the transformation journey. Any last thoughts that you have, Carl, before we kind of close this?
I'd say to anyone that's listening, getting involved with agile transformation, just be honest with yourself, honest and open with the people that you are working with, and try to encourage that within them, to try and help them to be honest and open with each other. If you can do that, humans have got a good way of actually working together in teams and making things happen. But it's when things are not transparent that it creates issues that you just don't want. So honestly,
Oops, I think we possibly lost Carl for a bit there. So again, the final points from our side would be trust and transparency. If you can look at these two elements within the context of the team that you are working on, and the more the trust, the more the transparency that you can ensure, I think the rest of the elements within the culture would possibly take care are taken care of from that point of view. With that being said, I really thank you all for joining the session. And if you have any further questions, please feel free to reach out Carl or myself, either on LinkedIn or on YouTube. And thank you for joining us again. Thank you, everyone. Have a great weekend ahead, and stay safe and stay healthy. Thank you.